This is the Cherish Each Moment podcast. Still getting used to the new setup here, and it never fails me that every time I try to record an episode of this podcast, that something decides to go wrong. And in today's episode, the SD card on the camera decided that it was full, even though it only had 6 gigs of video on it. It's 128 gigs total. But when you don't format the card for a while, it's kind of fooled into thinking that it's full. So I had to reformat the card, start over. We'll see how it goes now. But anyways, lots to talk about today. I'm really excited for all the things that I have to talk about. Have a special guest coming on later for a conversation about water conservation when it comes to watering your lawn. So much to talk about there. Can't wait to get into it. But before we get started, obviously we need to start with what's going on in the lawn. As of late, it's been 2 weeks since the last episode. I did kind of hint that I wasn't going to have an episode. I did go out of town. Went down to Moab with my wife. Saw Arches National Park and Canyonlands State Park down in southern Utah. First time out there, that was really cool. And for those of you watching on the YouTube channel, you're going to get a little bit of footage from that between segments. So enjoy that. And if you have any chance to come on out to Utah and check out national parks, there's plenty of them. And very, very cool places. Really enjoyed Arches. Thought it was really awesome. Hope to go back someday. So with that, let me talk about what's going on in the lawn over here recently. I mowed over the weekend, and I did some experimenting and ran some tests in the backyard with the Toro 60-volt recycler, and did a test with the Big League Lawns striping roller. Wanted to see how battery life was affected when towing a heavy striping roller. And if you own a Big League striping roller, you know that those things are beefy. They're built to last. So what I did was I had 2 of the 2.5 amp hour batteries. Those are not the batteries that come with the mower. I believe the base model comes with a 6 amp hour battery. The 2.5 amp hour batteries come with the hand tools like the leaf blower and the hedge trimmers, string trimmer. But you can use them in the lawnmower if you want to, which is cool about, battery tools these days is you kind of get into that ecosystem and the batteries are interchangeable between the tools. I like that. So what I did was I took a freshly charged battery and ran the lawnmower as normal until it died. And then I took a second battery, freshly charged, added the striping roller to the mower, and then did the same thing. Did the same route and wanted to see if there was any difference in battery life when you're towing. And I expected there to be some. I think that's kind of a given. There's more stress on the machine. But I was kind of curious to see how much and if it was worth towing a striping roller, if it was doable. So if you haven't seen that video yet, it came out today. Today's Tuesday. And that was today's video. So go check that out. And let me know what you think. I like doing stuff like that. It's kind of a different wave, if you will, for the video content. I like trying to mix it up every once in a while. The lawn is doing really well. It's really waking up now. Last week we got about 0.6 of an inch of rain. Just over half inch of rain was measured in my rain gauge. And gosh, we need all the free water we can get. We're going to talk about that today. And so that really helps wake up the lawn, kick the fertilizer in gear. I used the flagship fertilizer from Yard Mastery. I've talked about that. And the lawn's looking great. It's really waking up. The only areas that are still kind of getting there are a test plot for something that I'm testing right now. It's a very the applications of products for this program I'm testing are very far apart. I haven't even put in any nitrogen on it yet. I've put down a pre-emergent and I've put down some humic, and I'm not scheduled to put down a nitrogen-based product for another couple weeks or so. Beginning of May is when the first nitrogen product goes down. So that'll be about 3 weeks behind my normal program, my normal strategy. I'm kind of comparing, might do some video content around it. We'll have to see. But yeah, everything where the flagship was doing really well. The only area that's kind of struggling to come back, other than that test plot, which is doing well, it's waking up naturally very nicely. But the area in front of the trampoline, so between the trampoline and the patio in the backyard, where all the foot traffic is from all the kids going back and forth on and off the trampoline, that area is still coming back. So, but it's getting there. I'd say it's probably 70% back to green, which is exciting. We're almost there, and then once it's green, obviously I can start really having fun with the lawn. It's really fun to do stripe patterns back there, and much more fun to do it with the Time Master because it doesn't take as long to mow back there. But even still, the Checkmate rollers, regardless of what mower you have it attached to, put down a really nice stripe. Very, very nice. Very fun to use. Yeah, so very, very good rain. Another thing I've done was in the front yard. The area that I killed on accident is recovering really well, and I decided that I'm not going to do any plugs over there. But I did take about 7, maybe 8 plugs from the north side of my house and put them next to the walkway leading up to my front door near my garage. There is a spot that died there as well, and I have no idea what caused that. I could tell you exactly what happened on the other area that's recovering nicely. But this other spot where I ended up putting these plugs, I have no idea what happened. But it is what it is, and I put some plugs in there and used the Pro Plugger tool for that. Worked great. It would work even better if I didn't have rocky clay soil, and I did hit a couple rocks and had to try again for a better plug. But I think that's the hardest thing about using that, or any kind of plugging tool, is you have to get consistent sized plugs in order to make the transfer, the exchange, easier. So what I ended up doing was I just took a little bit of sand, and if I had to, kind of backfill a little bit, I just put some sand in the hole and then put the plug in. So it should be fine. I'm kind of excited to see how those plugs fill that area in. It already looks better just because there's more green in there. And then I did my spring application of a granular humic acid product. It's called Humate. For those of you that live in Utah, this is the Humate product you get at the IFA, which is the local farm co-op. For those of you outside of Utah, they offer a humic acid product. It's a granular humic acid. It's mined here in Utah, which is kind of cool. And it has, obviously, humic acid. And there's also a little bit of sulfur and some iron in there too. So it's always nice to see a little bit of a color response. I wanted to wait to apply this until I saw the color response from the flagship. And I'll tell you, the color response from the flagship was beautiful. What a nice green color. Really, really happy with how that turned out. Super cool. And I would expect similar results from the other products Yard Mastery offers. So excited to try those out and keep using those this year. I'm going to incorporate those into my program. Also looking forward to using other products too. Some products you've seen and maybe some products that are new. But yeah, I enjoy using that Humate. I use it twice a year. I'll put it down in the spring and I'll put it down in the fall. And always good when you're adding things to the lawn that are going to help your soil and make your soil conditions better. And humic acid is great for that. Sulfur is great for that, especially if you have high pH like I do. So any little bit of sulfur I can get. I still need to go to the garden center and get some elemental sulfur to apply for my first application of that to get my pH down. I just haven't had time. Very, very busy lately. Lots going on. Exciting things to talk about pretty soon. Got a pretty big announcement coming up in the near future. I'm not sure if you'll hear it here first or somewhere else, but you'll hear it, and I will talk about it here eventually. But I'm not ready to tonight just yet. So maybe for another night, we'll see. Stay tuned. But yeah, that's pretty much what went on in the lawn this week, and everything's really coming together. It's so nice to be mowing green grass again, to be able to put stripes in the lawn again. The front yard's looking really good. There's still areas that need to fill in from the aeration and top dressing with the sand in the fall. There's still a lot of thin spots, but it's already getting better. So really excited for that to thicken up all the way and just kind of fine tune it and enjoy it this season. So yeah, lots to talk about in this episode today. I'm really excited. We're going to talk a lot about water conservation. That's going to be like the big thing. I don't have any cool grass stories from the sports world or anything like that, unfortunately. I always like sharing those. I think it's kind of fun. I did watch the Masters, obviously. The Masters is a big thing. I talked about that in the last episode. We were gearing up towards the Masters for that. But yeah, I thought it was great. Grass looked good. Lots of good, exciting moments there towards the end. And great finish. So, yes, we're going to be all about water today. This is kind of gearing up for a video I'm planning. But I want to talk about kind of the situation that we're finding ourselves here in Utah, and what kind of talk about why Utah is a little bit different than other places across the country. Obviously, other western states and desert states out here can relate. And maybe you'll have some insights from this, and maybe we can get a little more education amongst ourselves and kind of bring this home. So looking forward to talking about that, and I'll take a break and come back and talk about that with you. So like I said, I'm going to be all about water conservation today and talking about watering strategies and kind of give you a little bit of an insight as to what's going on here in Utah this year. Watering, especially any year in the spring, watering is a hot topic. And if you go on Facebook groups, especially local city groups and city chat groups and stuff, there's always somebody complaining about somebody running their sprinklers or, things like that. And the comment sections are always the most entertaining. I like to lurk. Sometimes I'll make a couple comments if I feel like it's actually worth something. But I'm usually a lurker when it comes to that kind of stuff. But before there's two things here that just kind of pushed me into really wanting to talk about this. Obviously, the big thing here is we didn't get a whole lot of snow over this past winter season. I think our snowpack average across the state is around 65 or 70% of normal. So, water conservation is really a hot topic here this year because we'll get into this a little bit more. But pretty much all of our secondary water supply for irrigation across the whole state comes from rainfall, any kind of precipitation. So rainfall, snow, and that snowpack that melts off in the mountains and works its way down into the rivers and all of those outlets as well. And then any kind of water that's collected through the ground. And there's several reservoirs throughout the state where that water is stored. You know, we have Bear Lake, we have see, now I'm drawing a blank because I didn't put this in my notes. Lake Powell is one of those. Utah Lake, Deer Creek, Strawberry Reservoir, Flaming Gorge. And if you don't know where any of those are, that's fine. You can look on a map of Utah and see that they're pretty much scattered around the state and throughout the state. And that's where our water comes from. Obviously, for the culinary lines that come into the house, it's filtered pretty heavily. And then the secondary irrigation isn't filtered so much, if at all. It kind of just depends on the city that's providing it to you and where you live. And in probably all cases, you know, where that supply comes in to your property, that you have a filter there where that connection meets up with your own irrigation system. So obviously, the lack of snow that we've gotten and the talk that's already happening in my city and around the state, as you'll find out here in a little bit. But I'm seeing things in the news in other states as well, and Nevada was the one that came up first here for me. And I have close ties to Nevada. I grew up in Nevada. Most of my life was spent living in Nevada. Lived in Henderson, which is just southeast of Las Vegas. So I lived in the Las Vegas Valley. Obviously, it's out in the middle of the desert. Without Las Vegas, it would be the middle of nowhere. And water conservation there is crazy. So, growing up, I remember when I was little, my parents had grass in the front and the backyard. And I'm sure it was probably like a fescue because of how far south they are. But I remember they got rid of the grass in the backyard first because we had German Shepherd dogs that would just run across the grass all day long, tear it up. It wouldn't last. It just couldn't survive. So they got rid of that, and they put river rock back there, dry-scaped it, looked really nice. They kept the grass in the front yard, and I remember mowing that as a kid. Thought that was really cool when I was old enough to mow the lawn. That's one of my first memories mowing the lawn ever, was that front yard. And pretty small area, maybe 1,000 square feet, maybe. But after a while, I remember my dad decided that he was going to get rid of the grass. And it sounded like, you know, the city was really pushing people and encouraging people to get rid of grass in favor of dryscapes to conserve water. And up until that point, what they were doing, they were adding restrictions on what days you could water. So if you lived at like an even number address, you could water on, say, Mondays and Thursdays. And if you lived at an odd number address, you could water on Tuesdays and Fridays. And if you attempted to water on an off day that you were not allowed to water on and you got caught, then you got fined. And I remember even seeing city vehicles patrolling neighborhoods and patrolling my neighborhood driving around looking for people who were watering so that they could issue those fines. So they were really coming down on it pretty hard. And when my dad finally decided that he wasn't going to deal with it anymore, it turned out that the city was offering a certain amount of money per square foot for people to get rid of their lawn. And I think he told me back when he did it, it was around $2.50 a square foot. So not terrible. Pretty good money, pretty easy money, a little extra pocket change. So he did it. He got rid of the grass, took it out, put in the river rock, and all you got to do is spray the weeds. I think now with this article I read, they've upped it. They're now offering $3 per square foot. And the main thing about this article here is that they have become the first city to ban ornamental grass, which means any grass that is not that's just decoration. It's what they call non-functional turf. So it's just grass that sits like in the median of a street or just outside of a building complex. Grass that's not really meant to be walked on or activities played on it, anything like that. Just grass that just sits there and is just supposed to look nice. They don't want that anymore. They want to get rid of it. And they estimate that there's over 8 square miles of this non-functional turf in the Las Vegas metro area. It's grass that no one ever walks on or otherwise uses in street medians, housing developments, and office parks. So what they're saying is by ripping it out, they're estimating that they can reduce the annual water consumption by about 15% and save 14 gallons per person per day, which is kind of cool. That's a lot of water. That adds up fast. I think it's a good idea, personally. As much as I love grass, I also think being conservative is important. And I think that obviously steps need to be taken to be better about conservation. And I think if you're not going to be using it anyways, it really shouldn't be there. Obviously it looks nice, and I get that. I understand how that looks. And I'll bet in most of these cases, especially the stuff that's on the side of the road or in the middle of the road, like on a median, it doesn't look good anyways. It's not kept up. It's probably looking terrible. It's full of weeds, and you can probably imagine what that looks like. So I bet a majority of that is probably in that kind of a condition. And the stuff that's kind of outside of office parks or business parks probably looks a little bit better. And those people that own those business parks and those properties pay to maintain that lawn and that grass. So there's different circumstances there. But yeah, Las Vegas and Nevada, Southern Nevada in general, has a lot bigger water problem than Utah does, because obviously Utah is a source. We have the mountains that get the snow, and that water makes its way downstream and eventually ends up heading out that way. So they're at the end of the line almost. Obviously it's supposed to go all the way to Mexico and into the Gulf or into the Pacific Ocean, wherever it ends up. But yeah, sometimes it doesn't even make it that far. In most cases, it doesn't even make it that far. So kind of interesting what Nevada's doing. I think, obviously it's still okay to have a lawn in Nevada. I have friends out there still that I talk to, and some of them have lawns. Some of them have fake turf. But some of them are still growing lawns, and I think that's okay. As long as you understand how you can conserve water and contribute to that conservation, you can still have a nice lawn and practice good conservation. So that's kind of what I want to talk about today. I want to talk a little bit more specifically about Utah. And I think some of the things I talk about can be translated into anywhere. You can conserve water and still have a nice looking lawn. So the thing here, like I said, we didn't have a very good winter as far as snowfall goes. And before winter was even over, state and city officials have been really harping hard on water conservation. I think at least once a day I see a Facebook post, either from the state or from my city, about waiting to water. I think the big thing they're pushing right now is waiting until May 1st to water. Typically, cities around Utah, their secondary water is controlled by the city, and they have the ability to shut it off. So even if you tried to turn on your sprinklers, you couldn't because the water supply is cut off. The city where I live is a little bit different because the secondary supply line that feeds all of our sprinkler systems also feeds the fire hydrants. So if they were to turn that supply off, there'd be an issue if there was a fire. So kind of a little bit of a benefit there for me, because if I do want to turn my water on a little bit early, maybe to water in my pre-emergent or to water in my first fertilizer application, I can do that and then just keep my system off and conserve that way, which is what I do. And even though some of my neighbors already are watering regularly, which is up to them, that's their choice. But I think it's really just a lack of education. And that's what I'm going to talk about today. But for those of you who don't live here, obviously I've kind of hit on this a little bit, but we rely on that mountain water, that water that comes from the snow melts. And if there's no snow, there's no water. But one thing to understand is that the vast majority of the water supply, about 80% in fact, goes to agriculture. And that's one thing that I think a lot of people don't understand right from the beginning here, is that 80% of the water goes to farmland, crops. And we have a lot of that here in Utah, especially up north. And they use a lot of the water, and I don't know a whole lot about their systems and how they do it. Obviously, there's different strategies that you can use. You can use drip irrigation, you can use spray irrigation, and you can do flood irrigation. But I'm curious to learn more in the future about what they're doing to be more conservative in the way that they water their crops. I think that'd be a really interesting rabbit hole to go down. But I want to talk about, obviously, what I'm familiar with, and that's, basic lawn sprinklers and different products also that can be used to help conserve water. But I think one thing to understand is that only about 20% of the water used, at least in Utah, is used for residential purposes. Now, obviously, even though we get 20% of the water, we don't have to use 20% of the water. That's also important to understand. One thing that kind of bothers me is we've got officials that are trying to help us to be more conservatively mindful in the way that we use our water, but the way that they're going about teaching us how to do it isn't really accurate. And what I mean by that is, for example, some of the graphics I'm seeing are saying that if you have pop-up heads, like traditional pop-up spray heads, to water for only 20 minutes, and if you have rotary heads, to water for 40 minutes. Now, that's fine for the pop-up heads, because for 20 minutes you can get a traditional pop-up spray head can put down a half an inch of water in about 20 minutes or so. That's fine. But with rotary heads, it's different, because 40 minutes on a rotary head can mean anything depending on what radius you have your rotary head set to turn. For example, the majority of my rotary heads in my front yard are in the corners of my yard, and they're on a 90-degree spray pattern. So 90 degrees compared to several heads in my backyard, which are set to 180 degrees, those ones in the backyard are going to take twice as long to put down a half an inch of water as the ones in the front yard that are going 90 degrees, because they're rotating twice as far. I also have several heads in the backyard that are spinning a complete 360 degrees. Those heads are going to take twice as long as the ones that are spinning 180 degrees. So 40 minutes on each of those 3 head examples is going to be a very different amount of water in those areas over 40 minutes. So what we need to understand and know is that a good amount of water to put down during a sprinkler scheduled event is 1/2 of an inch. 1/2 inch every time you run your sprinklers is sufficient. 1 inch twice. Let me back that up. 1 inch per week. So 2 sprinkler scheduled events. So run your sprinklers twice a week at 1/2 an inch each time. That will give you 1 inch of water per week. That's a perfect amount of water for your lawn, for at least a cool season lawn, in the spring and in the fall. In the summertime, when we're really getting to peak heat, you might want to up that a little bit. Maybe add an extra cycle to that. Maybe run your sprinklers 3 times in the week. Maybe. You just got to kind of look at your grass and see how it's doing. Now, how do you know if you have 1/2 an inch? Is that 20 minutes? Maybe. Is that 40 minutes? Maybe. The best thing that you can do to know how much water you're putting down is to get an empty chicken can or an empty tuna can, go set them out across your yard, run your sprinklers for however long you normally run them. Then when it's all done, go and collect your tuna cans. I usually like to number them and write down where I put the numbers throughout the yard so I know if some cans have less water or more water, I know what areas need to be adjusted. But you'll see when you go out there and you check them, you stick a tape measure in there and just measure how much water's in there. If you're getting 1/2 an inch of water at the end of that watering cycle, then you're good. That equals 1 watering. So then you can adjust your timers, you can adjust, your sprinkler system, you can adjust your zones for how long they run, and you can test again if you need to. Generally, you'll have a pretty good idea of, what you need to do. And the more you do this, the more practice you're going to get. I like to do this typically once a year. I usually do it in middle spring, early summer, just to make sure going into summer that I'm getting good coverage and that I'm still getting the amount of water I expect to. So it's not about how long you water, it's about how much water you're putting down. That's the point that I'm really trying to make. And it all comes down to knowing and figuring out how long it takes each zone to put down 1/2 an inch of water, and then setting your schedule and how long you're watering each zone for however long it takes to get that 1/2 inch. So obviously, depending on what kind of sprinklers you have, like I said, is going to affect how long it takes to get that 1/2 an inch. So obviously, rotary zones are going to take longer at 360 degrees than they are at 90 degrees to get that 1/2 inch. So just something to remember, especially if you have a larger yard, you're going to have more zones. If I have 10,000 square feet of grass, it's going to take me a lot longer to finish my watering cycles than my neighbor down the street who only has 2,000 square feet of grass. And they have pop-up heads where I have rotary heads. So they're going to be done super quick compared to how long it takes me to get done. So something to keep in mind. Another thing to keep in mind is these smart sprinkler timers that are on the market now have a feature called Cycle Soak, which is awesome. And it's a great way to help conserve water. But it adds to how long it takes for your watering cycle to completely finish. If you're not familiar with Cycle Soak is when you say you have your zone set to water 20 minutes total, and that will give you the 1/2 inch that you know that you need. Well, what your smart sprinkler controller is going to do is it's going to water for, say, 5 minutes, and then it's going to go to the next zone, and it's going to keep cycling back to your first zone until it completes 20 minutes. But at the same time, after it goes through each zone, say a couple times, it's going to run a cycle soak, and it's going to completely pause all watering on all zones for a certain amount of time. Depending on which smart sprinkler controller you have, you can actually adjust how long you want a cycle soak to last, whether it be 15 minutes, 30 minutes, however long you want. That also plays into how long it takes to water your lawn. And, if your neighbors are kind of keeping an eye on you and they see that it's taking you several hours to water your lawn when it only takes them maybe a half an hour or 40 minutes, they're going to have some questions. And they're not going to understand all these different variables. So hopefully you can have a nice conversation with your neighbors about that at some point. I would hope that my neighbors are open to asking me about that because I have all of those things that I deal with, those different variables. I have a large backyard and I need to have those rotary heads. And I use that cycle soak feature. So lots and lots of different variables. But I think the most important thing to understand is to know how long it takes to get a half an inch of water. That's how long it takes to water your lawn. There's always questions online. How long should I water my lawn? People ask me all the time, how long should I water my lawn? And they're looking for an amount of time. And I say, however long it takes for you to get a half an inch of water, that's how long you should water your lawn. And then they say, well, how do I do that? And I tell them to get the cans out and measure it and all that stuff. So if you ever see someone, online tell you that you need to water your lawn for 30 minutes, that's not going to be accurate for your situation. There's way too many variables, and you just got to go by how long it takes to get that half an inch. That's really the ultimate thing. And to understand that you need about an inch of water a week in the spring and the fall, and maybe an inch and a half in the summer. And when you water your lawn deep and infrequently, so twice a week rather than every day, you're encouraging your grass to get stronger. And what I mean by that is when you soak your lawn with a half an inch of water, all that water is going to soak down into the soil, and your roots are going to see that, and they're going to chase that water down as far as they can because they want that water. That's how the plant survives. Big part of how the plant survives is water. And those roots are going to chase that water down. And if you water deep and give it a couple days for the soil to kind of dry out, those roots will be down there and they'll be looking for that water. Then you can hit it again with another deep watering, another half inch later in the week. The roots will stay down there, and they might even go further down because the water will keep going down further. But if you're watering your lawn every day, the roots are going to stay closer to the soil surface because that's where the water always is. The roots are going to go where the water is. So if you can get the water deep into the soil, that's where your roots are going to go. And if you have stronger roots, you're going to have stronger grass. It's going to be more tolerant to stress, more tolerant to drought, and you'll be conserving water at the same time because you're not watering every day. You don't need to water every day. A lot of people that water every day have issues with fungus or other diseases. Melting out is pretty common. I actually had that last year, I'll admit to that. Had it in my front yard. And when I saw it, I decided to do another tuna can test. I actually use empty chicken cans. It doesn't matter. You just need something that's going to collect the water. So, pulled out the cans, and I was actually putting down twice as much water as I needed to. I was getting down about an inch of water in the front yard every time I was watering. That was bad. So I've got to back off on my sprinklers and save some time on my watering there and save some stress on my lawn. So always learning. You just got to keep an eye on it, got to test it. But yeah, that's a great way to conserve water, is to know how much you're putting down and to be a little bit more organized about that. And just understand that everybody has different situations, and just understand that there's different variables to how long it takes to get that half an inch, and other methods to let that water soak into the soil too. So hope that's helpful for you. Those are my thoughts on water conservation. If you have anything else to add to the conversation, let me know. I'd love to hear about it and to talk about it. So hearing some other things going on around the state, and we'll bring that up in the next segment as well. So some cities out here in Utah are really starting to do something about the drought that we're finding ourselves in this year, and making some changes in the way that they handle their watering schedules. And probably a week or so ago, Ryan Quick from the Highlander Lawn YouTube channel, if you haven't seen that, if you haven't seen his channel, go ahead and check that out. Highlander Lawn. I'll leave a link down in all the show notes and the descriptions and all the places that you get extra information about the stuff I talk about here. It's different on every platform. But yeah, Ryan reached out to me and told me what they were doing up in the city he lives in. He's about an hour, probably a little over an hour north of me. And every city, as I've mentioned here, is kind of different in how they handle their water. And he reached out to me, told me what they're doing up there, and I thought it was really interesting, and asked if he would come on and talk about what's going on up there. So Ryan is here on the phone. Thanks for being here, buddy.
Thanks, Jimmy. Glad to be here.
So tell us what is going on in your city as far as irrigation water.
Well, normally, if we have a normal season, usually what happens is that the secondary is due to turn on April 15th and run through the season, and then shut off on October 15th. Prior to you and I talking, there had been no changes in that. The schedule was still going to stay the same. And the night of the 14th at about 8 o'clock, one of the city councilmen came on to one of the Facebook pages for the citizens page, and just to let the citizens know that the water would not be turned on. And I felt that it was kind of a snap decision, and it wasn't really didn't have the citizens brought in to weigh in on it, because there's some cities that are around us that have had their water on for a little bit of 2 weeks prior to that they've been on. And so, being the lawn enthusiasts that we all are, I was looking forward to being able to put some irrigation water down and get some fertilizer down and be able to get it soaked in to get moving on the year. And so that was a little bit frustrating. I understand. I mean, I'm all about water conservation. I think that it's, especially in Utah, where we're the second driest state in the union, and we have to be very careful about the resources that we do have. And I'm all about that. In fact, the way that I water and the type of irrigation system that I have is all geared to make sure that I get the absolute most efficient that I can when I do water, and make good use of those resources.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think the one thing that would kind of mess me up, and probably you feel the same way, is that they didn't let you know until the day before they were scheduled to turn the water on. And that's probably the biggest issue there. But you mentioned that you have a setup, your setup around your yard and your sprinklers is geared towards conservation. Talk a little bit more about that.
Okay. Well, about my brother, just a quick little backstory. My brother runs a sprinkler system company up in my hometown of Pocatello, Idaho. And when I moved to Utah, we purchased a home that the system obviously had been installed by somebody that wasn't quite that well versed in it, and I could tell that when we did turn the system on that I was going to have some problems. And I was like, we're going to have to cut in heads and whatnot. And he said, don't worry, I'll be down. I want you to take a look at these. And he introduced me to the Hunter MP rotators, and I absolutely fell in love. Now, one of the things about the MPs is that they don't pump out the amount of water that like a pop-up fan would. Your normal, what you see every day walking past somebody's yard or past a park or whatever it might be. They go on a very slow flow rate, low volume, where a 360 pop-up fan head would pump out 1.5 gallons in an hour. Mine will pump out 0.4 gallons in an hour. And so that makes a huge difference to the length of time that you have to water, because it basically waters like a very light rain shower. But the benefit is it allows for more permeation down into the soil and doesn't oversaturate, and then you deal with the problems of runoff and waste that you would if say for example you were to just flood irrigate something, much like throwing too much water on a sponge. Once it reaches the point of saturation, then it's not doing you any good, and the water finds another route to go.
Right. So a lot of other sprinkler systems, especially the smart watering systems like the Rachio, they offer features like cycle soak to kind of make up for that, to kind of help with the saturation. So with your sprinkler system, are you using a smart system that offers that still, or can you bypass that altogether because of the heads that you're using, these MP rotators?
Well, I can bypass that a little bit with the heads that I'm using, but one of the biggest things and is that I calibrate my system every year. You can use tuna cans, you can use the look with the spikes in it, but I calibrate it every year to make sure that I'm getting when I water, at least each time that I water, at least a half inch down in all my areas, and then make sure that because you and I both know you need an inch a week in the spring and fall, and maybe an inch and a half in the summertime when the heat's on. And so each time I have a watering cycle happen, that's my goal, is to hit that half inch and be done.
Right.
Not to overdo it, and make sure that I get, again, that permeation and that deep watering that will then make the roots chase the water as it starts to percolate through the ground, and cause the roots to chase it, and in doing so grow deeper and have a healthier lawn.
Right. Yeah, and that's something that I've touched on before is, I'm sure that you've had neighbors probably approach you and wonder why you're watering your lawn so much, just because, like you said, those sprinklers take longer to put out that half inch of water because of the slower flow rate. So you have the advantage of that slow flow rate because of what you've already talked about, but you have the disadvantage of fooling your neighbors into thinking that you're watering a lot more than you really are.
Yes.
And
I've had the poor experience of being on the wrong end of that.
Yeah. Didn't you tell me once that your water was actually shut off?
Yes. In fact, right after my brother had come down at that installation at my prior house, because, for some reason you get these neighbors that are quite observant, for lack of a better term. And because of that flow rate, I was watering for twice as long. I was still saving almost 30% of the water because I was getting a much better, deeper water. I wasn't pumping it out for 15 or 20 minutes. I was running it for 30 and for 35, I think, in one area. But that being said, he was observant of it, thought that I was watering twice as long as I should have been, never inquired of me what the situation was, and called in the city, and without any sort of discussion, the city shut my water off. And it wasn't until I noticed, I'm like, man, I'm starting to see stress, because my watering happens in the late evening, if not early into the early morning, to be able to accommodate those longer run times. And he must have been up pretty late, but he noticed it. And I had noticed that things were starting to dry out. And I'm like, I wonder if they've shut the water off. So when I inquired about it, they asked me for my name and my address, and I told them. And they're like, well, yeah, we've shut your water off due to over usage of water. And my jaw hit the ground and I think broke the concrete. because I was like, that's just ridiculous. That's not the case. And so I had the spec sheets with me. I went to the city officials and showed it to him, and he was like, "Wow, you're right. You're actually saving almost a third of the water that you would normally just, it'd build up, saturate, and run right off." And I said, "Yes, that's exactly why we've got these." So I wouldn't be surprised in a place as arid and dry as the state of Utah that we don't see some more push towards higher efficiency heads. But one of the biggest things is that education of the residents in our areas, because that's the big thing. Is because I did have a video that I put out last year that talked a little bit about that, and the question had been posed. I just moved to the area, and this is a person that had just joined the group, and said that my yard's not looking too well. I just want to know how long is everybody watering?
Yeah.
And literally responses of, I water every day, twice a day.
Wow.
And I was just floored. I'm like, that is an absolute waste of resources.
Mm-hmm.
And the funny thing is that person just happened to say, "Oh yeah, we had a fungus problem, but we got that fixed." And I was like, "Do you think I would have a fungus problem too if I was watering every day,
Twice a day?
twice a day?" Yeah.
Yep. Yeah, I think that's really the point to drive home is the education. I'm working on a video around proper watering practices too, and hopefully that will be well received and help people understand a little bit, because there's so many different variables when it comes to sprinklers and things like that, and different strategies around watering your lawn.
Well, and there's other you can add as well.
Mm-hmm.
Like hydrotane. That's a big one I'll be pushing this year.
Yep. And so that's another thing I wanted to ask you. Was the only change your city made just delaying the day that they're going to turn the water on for you, or are they making any other moves too?
Well, like most city and any types of government do, they sometimes don't tell you the entire story unless you're paying attention. But they did make the comment that they were pushing it back to May 1st. What they failed to also include, unless you were paying attention, is that they also shortened the season by 2 full weeks. So we lost basically a whole month of watering.
So now, they're still going to shut you off on October 15th?
No, they're shutting me off October 1st.
Whoa.
And so not only will my grass go dormant faster, because it's going to start to dry out. And as you know, living here, that clay soil, if it doesn't have some water in it, it'll turn to concrete pretty fast.
Yeah.
And compaction becomes an issue and whatnot. But it's an ever changing battle, that trying to make sure that we want to be good conservationists, just like you see a lot of people who are hunters and fishermen,
right, and
that nature. Those are some of the best conservationists that I've ever met. They have the respect of the land and the wildlife, and go the extra mile to make sure that those things are preserved, because they want to be able to continue that way of doing things. And I think that lawn enthusiasts, if they're really truly caring about their area, and I think that the drier and more arid the area that you live in, the more you're apt to be more proactive in making sure that you're being responsible in what you're doing.
I agree. So they're not going to limit you to certain days of when you can water or anything like that?
No.
At least not yet.
No, yeah, at least not yet. I guess I could go hog wild if anybody wants, but I'm just not going to do that.
Yeah.
I did make the comment to the city councilman that when they make such short snap decisions, I said, you realize that people are going to just end route this decision and just turn on their culinary and do it with a sprinkler.
Yeah.
And, the thing that amazed me was that didn't even seem to faze him. Because they feign conservation, but yet it was okay to be able to turn on your culinary and quote unquote, they'll have to pay the premium for that.
Yeah.
And
is your secondary line metered?
No. That's something that I wouldn't be surprised to see happen in the future, that we see that. Of course, that's going to be a massive expense, but
yes.
But currently it is not metered, and it's fairly, as it goes, really inexpensive on the whole. secondary water comes with its challenges. I'm not sure if you've got secondary where you live, but it comes with all sorts of other challenges other than just shutting the water on and off.
Right.
Yeah,
it's a little different down here where I live. We are on secondary water, and they never shut it off.
Wow. Lucky.
Yeah, and the reason being is it's the same supply for the fire hydrants in the city.
Oh, wow.
It's the same infrastructure. So if they shut off the secondary supply for all the irrigation, then the fire hydrants won't work. So
wow, that's an interesting way of doing things, because if they ever do try to reverse that, they've got to overwork the entire system.
Yep, which I don't think that will ever happen.
Wow.
That would be a massive undertaking. However, every house built after probably 2014, because ours was one of the last houses to avoid this. Every house built after 2014 is metered here.
Really?
So everybody that has a newer house is paying for the secondary water that they use, and the rest of us that are grandfathered in, so long as they don't put a meter in us in our on our supply, we're paying a flat rate, and it's like dirt cheap. So
yeah, but I think that because those homes that are not metered, I think that sometimes it breeds apathy. What do I care? It's cheap.
Right.
I'll just basically waste it away, and what does it bother? What do I care? I'm paying pennies on the dollar compared to these other chumps that are paying for the metered water, and I think, again, there's got to be a happy medium, and we need to really start caring about the resources that we have, or we're going to find ourselves in even worse trouble.
Right, I agree, and I think like you said before, it all comes back to education, and as long as we can put out the content and the material and help people understand, there are easier ways to do this, and there are conservative ways to do this, and you can do it without watering your grass every day and have an even better looking lawn.
Absolutely.
Cool. So any changes to your strategies based on the new information that you've received from your city?
Well, I did want to bring up last year what ended up happening, and I thought that was very good. I was paying attention to a little bit of what John Perry does on Longology, and he was talking about watering right during the time, right before the water was supposed to turn on. And this is before I launched my channel, and he had made the comment, I know that, a lot of places are getting, and I'm paraphrasing to the nth degree here, but the basic gist of it was, I know that a lot of folks are getting ready to turn their water on. And he urged, well, why don't you wait another few days or a week or whatever, and allow that, your roots to really chase. And I was like, wow, you know what? I'd probably do that. So in all reality, I'm going to be turning my water on maybe a week later than I did last year, because I really found a lot of value in that. Again, just because we have lawn channels and whatnot doesn't mean that we can't be educated, and or somebody can't teach us something.
Yeah.
And I was very attuned to that, and I happened to be inserting some more sprinkler heads into one of my mow strips, and when I cut it into through the sod and dug down, I couldn't believe it. I lost the footage on it, and some people may think this is a large fishtail, but that's fine. But I measured my roots, and they were almost 12 inches, and I actually filmed it and lost it, but my comment was, well, look at those roots, John Perry. But
classic.
We've seen that before, and I think they've even made it into a t-shirt these days.
Oh, I'm sure it's out there. So how's your lawn looking right now without having water yet? Is it waking up?
Got some stressed areas. There is one area that, because I live right across the street from the high school, and I get a lot of traffic on one of the mow strips by the crosswalk. And I had put down some Bewitched Kentucky bluegrass seed, which is rated for high traffic and drought stress and things of that nature, trying to, work against what's working against me. And as far as, the traffic that goes across it, but with the fact that it's starting to dry up, they're starting to create some paths in those, and I'm probably going to need to maybe hand water just that one little 80 square foot section to make sure that I've got some water going on it and help push the growth to help combat the traffic that's walking and treading over it. But other than that, my yard's not looking too bad. I've got some stressed areas that I'm kind of watching pretty closely. If I get to the point where I probably need to throw just a little bit on there, I might, but I really want to see if I can really stretch the limits and see if we can't make it. Because I've said this many times on my channel, and I'm sure that you feel the same way, is that grass is exceedingly resilient.
Yes.
And no matter almost what we do to it, 90% of the time it will come back, and usually come back stronger than it was before.
Yes.
And so I truly believe that. I say that a lot to my neighbors. That I had one that dumped an entire bag of fertilizer on his yard, thinking that his spreader setting needed to be 15 when he was looking at the wrong line, and it needed to be like a 6 or a 7. And he literally put the entire bag out, and that bag should have lasted him probably 2 seasons. Just because it's a 4-step program, and
right.
He should half of one this season and half of the other next season. And he really fried that yard pretty good. And I told him, I said, it will come back. It's going to take a little while, but I guarantee it will rebound and do well. But don't be sweating too many bullets. But maybe that add a little bit more water to the yard if he was sweating it out.
Yeah. Well, cool. Well, I appreciate you coming on and telling your story about what's going on up there, and we'll look forward to seeing how things progress on your channel this year, and wish you all the best with it.
Well, thanks, Jimmy. I really appreciate being on the podcast and for you inviting me.
Awesome. Thanks again for coming.
You bet.
That's Ryan Quick, the Highlander Lawn. All right. Special thanks to Ryan for coming on and talking about what's going on up in his area of the state. Pretty interesting to kind of get a little bit more perspective. Obviously, there's different situations in different cities, even in the same state. So kind of cool to hear what's going on and how he's going to do that. One thing that kind of came up but wasn't really hit on yet, a strategy to really help with water conservation, especially during the hot summer months, is to incorporate hydrotane into your lawn care strategy. If you're not familiar with hydrotane, it's a moisture management product. It's made by a company called Ecologel, and I started using hydrotane a couple of years ago. And the way it works is it's designed to pull any outside moisture, whether it be in the soil or in the air, into the root zone of the plant and provide that additional water to the plant. And they claim that it can save, if I remember right off the top of my head, like 20% of watering. For me, when I use it, I will typically use it during the hot summer months. So peak summer is when it starts making its way into my applications. Now, the way that you use it is you apply it to soil that is already wet. So after a watering, maybe like the day after you water, get out in the lawn, get an application ready to go. You apply it to fairly wet, damp soil. It goes down at an initial application rate of 9 ounces per 1,000 square feet. And then you can do follow-up applications monthly after that at 3 ounces per 1,000. After you apply it, you want to water it in and get it down into the soil so it can start doing its thing. I did a test on it was that last year or the year before? I can't remember. I took 3 potted plants. One of the plants got water. One, I think it was a gallon of water. The second plant got a gallon of water with liquid hydrotane in it. And then the other plant got granular hydrotane, and then it was watered with a gallon of water. And there was a noticeable difference in which plants survived that test. And the hydrotane performed very, very well. Like I said, I use it in summertime, and it typically saves me an extra watering cycle each week when I'm actively using it. So definitely helps beat that summer stress, especially on cool season lawns. Kentucky bluegrass typically likes to tend to stress or even check out around 85, 90 degrees if you're not staying on top of the watering. And hydrotane just kind of helps make that a little bit easier for you to stay on top of. So I'll leave a link about hydrotane in the description for you guys. Check that out. Great product, great company, great people behind the scenes there. And most importantly, it works. I think that's probably what you really want to hear, is that it works. I trust it, I use it, and it works great. So as far as what's going on in my lawn coming up here, I'm going to be taking my reel mower to get sharpened for the first time. That should be good. I hear that it makes a big difference, and I'm excited to experience that. Hopefully it doesn't take too long. I'm going to try and mow the lawn tomorrow, and then probably take it in on Thursday, have them get that taken care of for me. Hopefully it doesn't take too long, and I don't have to get my grass down to its 3/4 inch height of cut. Another thing I'm going to be doing, what else am I going to be doing? Pretty much just mowing for the most part. I'm still trying to get on top of the weeds in the garden beds. Just got a little bit more in the backyard to do, and going to keep an eye on the plugs and just keep doing what I can to fill in the front yard as it's still thin. So also, one other thing that I'm starting to make plans for is my project lawn from last year. The other Jimmy's house. For those of you that haven't been following along, helped a friend out last year. He bought a house not too far from me. We did a series of videos on how to get ready to lay sod in the front yard, and this year we're going to be doing some seed. And we're going to get it down in the spring. We're going to do it as soon as possible. Temperatures are almost there for us to have a good temperature window, probably in the next couple of weeks, I imagine. But starting to make plans there. As far as I know, he's got his sprinklers in and ready to go. And he's got some topsoil there. He had the topsoil down before winter, and it's gotten kind of hard and compacted, as you would expect, because of, the snow and the rainwater that we've gotten to. So I think he's been working to loosen it up a little bit, get it ready for seed. And I'm going to go over there and start finishing that up for him. So we're going to get some GCI blue heat, Kentucky bluegrass down out there. Excited to see how that germinates, and hopefully we can get a good germination and good growing. I'm really looking forward to that. And I know a lot of people have been reaching out to me too. They're looking forward to seeing how that turns out as well. And it will just be kind of fun to wrap up that project. And hopefully we can start on a new project. We'll see what happens. But that's what's coming up. And other than that, it's just mowing, maintaining things as they continue to wake up. So that's going to go ahead and wrap it up for me today. Thank you guys so much for listening. And I appreciate you. This has been really fun for me. I look forward to future episodes and look forward to continuing to get used to this new setup here as I try to cue up the music. So this is the Cherish Each Moment podcast. Thank you for listening. Don't forget to cherish each moment. See ya.